a face to the name so everybody sees Mr. Todd Dickerson has been approved by the Township Board last night, and he is the new Economic Improvement Director for the Charter Township of Oscoda. So, since he got here yesterday, he's been fed through the fire hose as far as me pushing the whole pile off of my desk onto his in the morning, followed by an afternoon full of Joe Brooks from the Ben Hall Road, and I'm prepping him to understand what we've been doing over the last year and a half with a strategic plan. You're going to hear today about the economic development strategy, the community branding and marketing strategy, the downtown redevelopment strategy, the communication strategy. So what all that means and how that's going to get linked together into deliverables. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Borgstrom and Ben Monroe so you can hear all that.
Thanks for the one clap. I appreciate that. That's typically the response I get. Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. Noon on a Tuesday. This is a great turnout. I'm really thrilled with having you all here today. As Dave talked about, make sure this is working. There we go. Everything that we worked on is through the lens of the Redevelopment Ready Communities program through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. The township is working very hard to become certified in that, and as part of that, we helped the township go through this product that we call Placeleap. And Placeleap for Oscoda is really talking about the economic development and community marketing plan, place branding plan, the downtown redevelopment plan, and a strategic communications plan. So it's a whole lot of plans, but it really it coalesces into one type of thing where we can look at how do we improve Oscoda Township. I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about each of these sections here quickly. The economic development plan really ties in a lot with the strategic planning. So the first time I came to Oscoda to work with you guys was about a year ago, where we did strategic planning for the township. How many folks were part of that big SWAT meeting? A lot of the folks in the room. We identified the assets of the community, and my apologies, it's a little washed out here, but the nature and the outdoors of the community was considered one of the biggest assets. Lake Huron and the beach itself, Kalita Air, and the airport were seen as the four biggest assets to the community. Far and away, by the way, was that nature and outdoors, and I could probably lump Lake Huron and the beach into that. And it was like, as I recall, the votes were like crazy. It was something like 90-something odd votes for that, and like the next one was like 40 or 50. So the community really understands and appreciates the environment in which Oscoda exists, especially along the shores of Lake Huron. I want to talk a little bit about the market conditions. This is really important to understand from an economic development and a downtown redevelopment what the market conditions are. And when we did this, we originally looked at 3 rings. We looked at 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and the blue, if you can see a little bit, is 45 minutes. When we really started drilling down on the market viability of different types of businesses, we really kept it to that 15-minute loop, because we really feel like this is probably the most realistic in terms of what people will come to Oscoda on a daily basis for. I want to share this with you. You're going to get a lot of data. Poor Todd and Dave sat through 2.5 hours of us talking about data and projects and everything yesterday. I don't want to give you so much the full fire hose, but what I really want to concentrate on is this 15-minute loop. And the first thing is what's called a retail gap. And what a retail gap is, it's the difference between the amount of demand within the community, how much are the people within that 15-minute loop around downtown, drive time around downtown, how much are they currently spending, and how much is currently offered here within the community. And so there are 3 levels here. This is the total, and we've got total retail and then total food. So there's currently $162.5 million of spending in that 15-minute radius, drive time radius right now in this community. 147.7 million of that is in retail goods, stuff that we buy every day. And then the other $14.8 million is in food and drink. But we see these gaps here because we've got $30 million of that leaving the community every day. 26.4 of that is in retail trade, $4.3 million is in food and drink. All of that's being spent somewhere else on an annual basis. The next thing we did was said, all right, that's what's going on now. What do we think is going to happen in the future? So we took a look at the projections for retail growth in these same areas. So that 15-minute radius, you're looking at a growth of $16.1 million in spending overall. How many people are shocked to hear that there's $162 million of spending in your community? There is. It's there. I think a lot of times communities, especially in northern Michigan, we have a tendency to be kind of down on ourselves and think that we don't have that much money. You have a lot of spending power within this community. And I want you guys to realize that. It's only going to get stronger. So we're going to see a $16.1 million growth over the next 5 years in total retail and food and drink. 14.4 million of that's going to be in retail, $1.7 million in food and drink. Now I will tell you that underneath retail, trade, and food and drink, there's about 60 different subcategories. So there's a million different things, 60 different things, that go underneath each one of those areas in different sectors. What we did is we took a closer look at where the community is spending their money and how much supply do you have, and where are those greatest opportunities for business recruitment in the near future. This runway. So this was a list of the top contenders that we saw, and this, my apologies, it looks like a really convoluted bingo card, but what we have as we go through this is the current demand, the current supply, and the current gap. So all that stuff we saw broken down on a category basis, and then we projected out the demand for 5 years, and then we took a look at what that projected gap would be, and then in each one of these categories we went down and figured out what the national sales per square foot average is for a store of that type. And then so we took this projected gap and we divided it by that number, and we came up with this last column, which is maximum projected square footage. So what all this means is we took a look at how much money you guys are spending in the community, how much you're going to spend in the community, figured out how much are you currently spending elsewhere, and then figured out what kind of support could you have for some of these businesses for there. And these were the biggest ones. So one of the things we did, which is unusual and normally when we do these, is we actually calculated in the closing of Kmart. And that's about $3 million, $3.8 million in spending that's just gonna be sucked up somewhere else, more than likely, probably from Walmart down in Tawas, East Tawas. So there are retail opportunities throughout all this as we look at it. And I will tell you, just because there's a gap here doesn't mean if you start a business in one of these sectors, that it's guaranteed to be a success, because there's a lot of other factors that go into this. But this gives us the greatest idea in terms of what could the community support. Now I want to get into it, just one little thing as we talk about this and what this means. So the department store line item, we could combine with family clothing stores and women clothing stores, and look at all that and say, all right, what would be a good fit for that? Do we think that, a Kmart rival, so do we think Target or Walmart will be interested in coming here? Probably not. I don't know if the community would even want one of those two things. But one of the things that we think might be successful would be, if you're familiar with the term, with a store Glicks, or like a Peebles or Gordon's, that you have enough retail spending here that could support one of those types of retail entities. And what we would really encourage would be for those to go downtown, to the downtown area, to help kind of build up that density, be able to build up that. So these are just, I want to give you this idea in terms of what this sales per square foot is, what we're looking at in terms of how much the community spends and how much it is that they do on an annual basis.
And I'll jump in because Joe is kind of the straight man and I'm the color commentary, I guess. Obviously he loves numbers and I'm a picture guy, so I look at these charts and I'm like, oh, please go forward and show us something that's pretty. But the thing that's interesting about these numbers is, right now our community is able to gauge its market health off of buildings that are vacant and businesses that once existed that closed. And everything, our market understanding is all anecdotal. When you have an abandoned Arby's, it's like a monument to failure. So you're convinced we don't need any more fast food because we had a fast food restaurant that closed. What we start to see here is this data is now starting to arm us with the exact same data from the exact same data sources that national site selectors are using as they're keeping their radar out for new site locations. And in every single category, there are trigger marks of leakage that start to pique the interest of particular business types. So really what we're doing is we're just leveling the playing field and we're allowing the community to have a really good, grounded understanding of actual economies. This is money that we don't have to invent. This is money that consumers in this geography and are already spending in that particular category, and all we have to do is change the retail trade behavior and capture that money here. So it's kind of the path of least resistance to success. Doesn't mean that there's not more to be had, but it really is a good place for us to start from the growth standpoint.
And this is important. The reason that we're giving you this data is because the two main things that came up as we did the economic development strategy and the strategic planning before that is, one is that there's empty storefronts downtown. As I recall, we looked at the weaknesses for the township. The number one concern was the empty storefronts downtown. So part of this is the economics at play, what types of businesses would be looking to recruit. The second part of this, and we're going to talk more about, oops, wrong way, is housing. And housing is going to play a huge role in this. We'll talk more about that in a second. But I wanted to show you guys some of your industry statistics real quick. One of the areas that you guys are far and away, typically this number, that transportation utilities, obviously that represents Kalita and those related types of companies that are out at the airport. This number is typically anywhere between 1% and 3% in a community. That is a huge number. This is a good thing for your community because this is, they're bringing in a lot of money from the outside and coming here, and they're hiring Oscoda-based folks, and they're hiring, bringing in folks from the outside to come here and go through the training. But this is just a snapshot of what your local economy looks like. I will tell you that manufacturing is right about in line, maybe even a little bit higher too, on top of transportation, in terms of what that represents. Those are good things because those are typically higher wage categories. Service businesses are important, especially for local business owners. But typically, like retail, we see a lot of minimum wage jobs. We want to try to encourage more manufacturing, more retail trade, more transportation. But retail and services are still important as well, especially for helping to create local wealth. So I don't want to downplay that, but when we talk about the number of jobs and the quality of jobs, we typically see the higher wage jobs in Northern Michigan communities in those areas. So let's talk a little bit about types of projects. So one of the things that we've talked about is, Kalita is an important part of your community. And this isn't necessarily in reference to anything in particular, but anytime that Kalita looks at an expansion, this should be a top priority for the community in order to retain. When the base closed, I think a lot of folks here remember that and how much the community, kind of semi-died when that happened. What Kalita offers is not only the 1,200 jobs that they have out there, but they're continually bringing in people from the outside. Almost every Northern Michigan community that I work with has an issue with population decline. It drives all your other economics, all the other retail, all your housing, all of that is driven by population. You guys actually have a population generator in your community that almost nobody else has in Northern Michigan. So that makes them a priority as you look at your economic development initiatives. The launch initiative. It's no secret that Oscoda, I think, is in the running for a commercial spaceport. That's something that could be huge for the community. You guys have assets that virtually no one else has. Even when you look at the places like K.I. Sawyer and the other places in the running, they don't have a launch pad. They don't have the proximity to the lake that you have. You have things that other communities don't. So I do think you'll be a strong contender there. It's not, by no means is it a guarantee, but I think you are definitely a strong contender. As you ramp up your economic development efforts, it's really important you guys do some of the basic, what we call blocking and tackling of economic development. So part of that is the retention and expansion visits. So one of the things that Todd will be doing will be meeting with the manufacturers, the other kind of economic base businesses within the area, is trying to figure out, going out and meeting with them annually, talking to them, finding out what their issues and needs are and how the township can help make that. And then also attraction efforts, so site marketing. One of the biggest things I think that's the township is lacking is an inventory of the available both industrial and commercial properties in the community. So getting a handle on that, we've already talked with Todd, that's going to be one of the first things that we've identified as a priority for the first part of this next year, is identifying the inventory of available properties for a potential business, whether that's industrial or commercial. Startup, one of the other things we think is really important, we talked about business recruitment. Business recruitment is a part of economic development. I'm a much bigger believer in growing your own. And I think one of the things that Oscoda lacks a little bit is an entrepreneurship environment or ecosystem. So some of the things that we had suggested was partnering with folks like the Chamber of Commerce to help do small business education and training, to help the small businesses who are here get better. We've talked about the potential of creating a revolving loan fund, potentially partnering with Oscoda County, but even if the township does their own, you are eligible for funds through the U.S. Rural Development, USDA Rural Development loans or grants to be able to create these revolving loan funds. We've talked about vacancy awareness, so I talked about that property inventory, but making sure that small business owners understand what properties are available and how much those rents are. We've talked about the potential for rent reduction programs, and we've talked about co-working space. You know, this idea of using underutilized spaces for professionals who may be here, and you guys actually do have quite a few weekenders who come up. If you can extend those folks being here onto a Friday and Monday, that's an opportunity to be able to help use some of that space.
And before you jump in terms of this entrepreneurship, I think one of the things that is essential for a community to truly have that entrepreneurial ecosystem is the willingness to understand that businesses are hard to start and flexibility is the key. I think for the longest time it's always like, hey, let's put together a low interest loan pool. Well, it might not be the interest rate that they need. It's how quickly do I have to start repaying it? Like, how long do I have to build a customer base? How long do I have to build a revenue stream? As property owners, are we understanding of the seasonal nature of our market? And does that understanding of the seasonal nature reflect in the way that we sign our leases and the way we collect our rents? Is the rent the same in the middle of February when nobody's buying anything as it is in the middle of July when we have visitors that are filling the marketplace up? So really rethinking all of those standard dynamics and starting to talk about the factors that truly create an environment where businesses can thrive. The worst thing in the world that can ever happen is an entrepreneur who will go out, say, hey, I'm going to start a restaurant and make it for 3 months. 3 months. Like, if you can only stay open for 3 months, probably you didn't necessarily have all your ducks in a row before you started. So how do we create that environment where we can make things successful?
So housing, this was the other thing that we heard from virtually every employer here in Oscoda. One of the issues that you have is you have a good number of housing units. Part of your issue is the use of those units, and the second part of that is the lack of rental units. And by that, I mean traditional apartment complexes. You guys, in Kalita, you guys have a group that brings in about 50 people every month to come to the community. A lot of those guys end up, they're going from motel to motel, and in the summer months, they're then camping out at the campground or sleeping in their cars because they can't afford a place to live. That doesn't really roll out the welcome mat to these guys who are potential residents who are making quite a bit of money per year. So creating a product in terms of apartments for not just them, but other folks who may be wanting to come to the community is important. I show this chart, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the blue represents the number of houses that are considered vacant in Oscoda Township. These are second homes. This is the first community, honestly, that I've worked with where 42%, the majority of the percentages between vacant, renter-occupied, which is yellow, and owner-occupied, which is green, you have more vacant housing because of the nature of it being second homes than you do of either of the other two. So 42% of your housing stock is taken up in seasonal rent, as a seasonal housing. So it's people who are either snowbirds or there are folks who are weekenders. So that bites into where folks can go. So when we talk about the potential projects, we're talking about really these 4 areas. So we're talking about single family year-round, multifamily year-round, single family seasonal, and seasonal rental. We really want you to focus on multifamily first, single family after that, but year-round residences. It's important that you guys, first of all, are able to capture the people who are coming here on essentially a temporary basis. When they come into Kalita, as an example, they're here for 12 to 18 months as they go through their certification. After that, they decide whether or not they want to stay here, if they want to transfer somewhere else within the Kalita family. We have that opportunity while they're here to make them part of here. And the reason why they're important is, again, as we bring in those potential residents, that's more people that can grow here. We have more retail opportunities. We'll have more restaurant opportunities by capturing those folks and making them a part of here. before they can move here full-time, and if they have a trailing spouse and family, well, they'll want a single family, we've got to at least have somewhere to put them in the meantime. So 12 to 24-month leases, and then the ability for there to be an inventory of available housing after that. So we bring them in, they make them feel a part of the community, they rent apartments, and then if they want to stay from here, then we have all their single-family offerings for them to move out of the apartments and into and bring their trailing families with them if they have. These two I'm not worried about. You guys have more than enough stock in both of these things. Really worried about multifamily in particular, followed by single family. Okay, we'll not get these buttons straight all day. So multifamily, by the way, also includes, we have it on here, is upper floor. We have another comment, I can't remember if it's in the downtown plan or if we have it in this part as well, but what you really need to do with the downtown is you need to increase density. We have a lot of single-story buildings in the downtown, and you need more rental apartment opportunities, whether it's seasonal or even, again, we want the permanent full-time, but you need to have more upper floor in downtowns. That's one of the hottest properties across the state, across the country right now, are downtown types of opportunities, places where people can walk. It does two things. One, it creates a better use of the space in a downtown by having multi-story, by having upper floors, but it also creates a natural market for the businesses who are downtown. So by creating more density in the downtown and creating more upper floors, we're actually addressing some of our other issues with multifamily, but creating more character and creating more economic impact into the downtown. The other part of this is not just a product standpoint. Part of this is kind of the onboarding, the soft skills. Now, as a former military-based community, you guys understand that as a military base, people come in and out all the time. You're still going to have that with Kalita and some of the other employers who are coming in. Some folks just won't be here full-time. But if you have the opportunity to capture them, you should take them. Some of the stuff is, in the great words of Yogi Berra, not rocket surgery. The idea around welcome packets. This is all stuff, I can't tell you the number of people that when we've talked about this stuff, the times we heard, well, we used to do that. I think this is low-hanging fruit. When you look at welcome packets, doing the tourism industry refers to as familiarization tours. So when folks come once a month, they come into the community, you create a tour around what's here. As locals, you guys all know what's here. If you're somebody from the outside who's coming up from Texas or from Tennessee or from somewhere else, they have no idea what's here. And so to be able to help familiarize them with what's going on. And then also, by the way, you can expand that to include, waiters and waitresses and the folks within the tourism industry, so they're aware of what else is going on as well. And then we've even talked about the opportunity to do a monthly welcome event. Hey, welcome to Oscoda, we're glad you're here. Whether you're here for 12 months or 12 years, we want you here. Sending that message is important.
With micro retail, one of the big things that we try to talk about with micro retail is this idea that some of our more historic retail spaces might not be appropriately scaled for more modern retail. We went through and we kind of did this exercise where we played the game of averages, and I know that doesn't apply to every community, but if you were to take average rent rates and kind of go through and try to figure out how much does a business have to sell for an individual to make the same as a moderately, let's say moderately paid teacher, they're going to have to sell about $12,000 a month just to end up bringing home about $36,000 a year. There's a reason why a lot of local retailers seem so angry and irritated all the time. It's a difficult industry to thrive in. One of the other things that we realize is in America, people love to talk about average rent rates. It makes them sound really smart. And we don't necessarily realize that there's an average rent rate difference between commercial rent and retail rent. And on average, retail rent's about $10 less a square foot than commercial and office use because it just cannot turn over the same way. They need to be able to have enough money to both pay their rent, pay their power, and buy inventory. So on average, one of the things that we see in America, the average size historic retail space is about 1,800 square feet. So this space would have to have $195,000 worth of merchandise to actually feel full and keep it full for the year. But if we were to introduce the idea of scaling that space down, keeping the storefront the same, but adding the wall in, using back space for more office or service space, keeping a smaller front space, if you were to divide it in a third and drop a third off into office, that 195 drops down to 97,000. And you can kind of scale it all the way down to, we're seeing these tiny micro retail bays where, let's say you have an insurance company that has a front lobby that literally sits empty all day long. Recapture that as retail. From the street front, it feels like you have a store, but you still have those employees in that service industry back behind it, and you can start up a business and turn this thing over with an inventory of $16,000, which now all of a sudden is far more reasonable. So we're starting to see this happen across the country. This is the community that I live in Delaware now, Milford. This is an engineering firm, and they had all these engineers in this building, and the weird thing was, if you know any engineers, no offense to John or anybody from Beth Rader, you know, sometimes engineers are funny, and these offices up front that had windows, nobody wanted them. They said they were too hot, you know? So literally they had 3 vacant offices along the front of the building that they were paying for. So we showed them how they could simply recapture those spaces, turn these into small retail businesses, and now all of a sudden from the street front, instead of having an entire block that felt dead to the pedestrian, you've increased the number of businesses that are there, you've increased the retail density from the street side, and you still maintain the service presence in your community. Same thing right around the corner. We have this fantastic skating center. Strangely enough, you know, the skating center just couldn't make it work. They were paying 22% of what market rate was, and still weren't able to pay their rent because we just don't have the skaters we used to. So showing how they could turn this into something that had multiple small units. That led to some of the designs that we used after Hurricane Katrina to help retail businesses get back online. These are called tiny shops. They're designed to be the size of a single, double, and triple parking space. So literally they could be dropped anywhere and create automatic retail density. And you start to see these interesting little micro retail villages, retail spaces that are about 300 to 400 square feet, and they're popping up all over the country where they're creating this really nice sense of energy. And it's a great temporary use for available property in your downtown to prime the pump for maybe a longer term infill development. So we've also probably all seen the idea of using shipping containers to do that kind of work as well. So the idea of changing up the kind of retail you have, taking advantage of the space that you have, and being able to create multiple experiences for people to interact with the community.
I'll talk a little bit about tourism. Obviously, tourism is a big part of your economy here, but I think it could be a little bit better utilized, I guess the best way to put it. The first thing is, you know, I think I've really been struck by the lack of fall color tour people here. I've done work in the Eastern UP and been up there in the midweekend of September and can't get a hotel room. John remembers we were in Newberry, how packed that place is on a Tuesday. I remember asking, like, who's up here on a Tuesday in September? And they said, well, people from other countries. They're literally, our state's marketing to Germany and to England and all these folks to come to see our colors. So extending our shoulder seasons, I think, is going to be really important for our resort and hotel and motel folks. Getting the designation as a trail town. I know that Oscoda Township and Oscoda Township are pursuing this with the schools. That this helps, this is a DNR program where they market these communities, your communities, as trail destinations, and there's a lot of folks who use the trails, especially bicyclists. I used to say bike people, but then people don't know if I mean motorcycle or bicycles. But bicyclists, because they actually have a really high spending habit of getting those folks. So having those folks come here is important. The other part of this that I'm really kind of shocked about is that your room assessment rates in Oscoda are 2%. So if you're not familiar with how CVBs work, Convention Visitors Bureaus work, it's a state law that allows for the entity to charge it to essentially a 2% tax. It's an assessment. Talk to a lawyer; they'll tell you all day what the difference between the two is. But it essentially acts as a tax. And that's the tax that visitors spend when they're here. So they're taxed automatically 2%. The state law was changed about 3 or 4 years ago to allow that cap to go up to 5%. And immediately, a lot of the convention visitors bureaus around the state did it. They just turned around and said, all right, great, we can do 5%, we can do 5%. Because that's not being paid by anybody here locally. That's being paid by the visitors who are coming here. You can then capture that money and then spend that to be able to promote the area more, especially in shoulder seasons. So you can do that, and that's something that we're recommending is that the CVB raises their assessment from 2% to 5% to allow visitors who are coming here. By the way, if you've ever been anywhere, I guarantee you've paid this tax if you stayed in a hotel pretty much anywhere in the country. It's one of those things that people just no longer even consider as they make their decisions. So that's something that we think that the community should be doing.
And even at 5%, 5% is significantly lower than most other places. We're seeing, on average, the people love to play the game of averages. They say that the average is somewhere around 8.5% to 9%. Easily seeing people spending 11 to 12 cents per dollar on stays like that. The whole idea of travel is taxed at every angle. I rent rental cars a lot, and my $200 rental turns into $320, strangely enough, just because of taxes every single time. And the thing is, hoteliers hate the idea of it. They're like, nobody will come here. Everybody pays it. They don't compare it. They can't compare it. It's hidden after the fact. So it's not factoring in to the decision-making process. So really it is revenue that is available to you that's sitting out on the table that could reach up to about, $120,000 extra dollars a year to help you market the community.
So the next piece of this is talking about the strategic communications plan. And in my opinion, I've worked with local units of government in various capacities for the last 22, 23 years. And I will tell you that the number of communities who have a formal strategic communications plan is about next, you probably count on one hand. One of the things that we want to do is work with the township in creating the strategic communications plan with several different target audiences. If you've done corporate communications, this should sound pretty familiar, some of the terminology we're going to use, but for municipalities, we don't always think about these sorts of things. So we looked at who these markets are. So we looked at potential residents, both existing and potential residents. We looked at developers. We know that we need more, both single family and multifamily housing, so that's gotta be one of our markets that we talk to. We gotta talk to businesses, so existing and potential businesses. And then, of course, we're gonna talk about the locals, so that the resident, prospective resident, and existing resident is part of that. This is all very easy to see if you're in the back of the room. But what we wanted to show is we wanted to demonstrate all the potential audiences with their community. And again, I'll read these off for you so you can't really see them. So the local audiences, you've got Oscoda Township, you've got area businesses, you've got the other entities within the county, you've got employees, you've got different community organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, the CVB, the Historical Society, the Beautification Committee, the Regional Farm, the Economic Improvement Committee, and you just go on and on and on and on, all the different local partners that we should be doing a specific outreach to. Other regional and state partners, obviously the surrounding townships, the county, the governor's office. You're looking at the MEDC, all the different state departments, your federal representatives, both Congress, your congressmen and both senators. It's important that they know what's going on in our communities because that's their opportunity to find things that can help your community. So it's important that you consider these. The other one of this I wanted to show you was these are all the different media that's out there who are constantly looking for things to talk about. And you as a community are a reputable news source. And there's a ton of just local media here within the kind of northeast region, and you've got regional media down here, which includes kind of that Flint, Saginaw Bay City area, as well as Alpena, and then the statewide media. One of the reasons I want to show this is because you guys are a notable place. People know Oscoda. If I say Oscoda, there's very few people in the state of Michigan that I talk to who say, where's that? People know who you are. And it's important for you to tell your good stories. I want to share a slide with you. This happened, I think it was the 26th. Was that Saturday? I think it was Saturday. So I'm scrolling along and I see this beautiful photo of your pier here in Oscoda, posted by a guy named Chad Livingood. Chad is a senior editor at Crain's Detroit. I followed Chad for, 2 or 3 years on Twitter. They have a weekend place here. He posts almost every week about things going on here in Oscoda. One of the editors at Crane's Business. The only reason I want to share this, one, that's a really cool photo. But two, is that we have people who are already paying attention to your story, whether you're telling it or not. And you have that opportunity to proactively tell that story. And you need to seize control of that a little bit. And so I just wanted to share that because he's very positive about Oscoda in general. But these are the types of ambassadors that are out there. And I guarantee you, if you go and you search the hashtag of Oscoda, the number of people who are posting from here, and not just local folks, I'm talking about people from all over, is huge. One of the things we use in the actual printed report is a screen capture from Instagram from the Pure Michigan brand, which they have of the Lumberman's Monument. And it's got 18,000 likes on it, 17,000 likes on it, something like that. People know who you are, and you have to proactively tell your story. So again, very easy to read on the screen here. But what we did here as part of the actual plan in the document is we talk about who all these different target audiences are, how you can be reaching them, and then the frequency and the channels in which you should be doing it. And when I say frequency, I mean how often. And when I say channel, I mean, is it Facebook? Are we talking about newsletters? Are we talking about press releases? What are we talking about? So we've gone through and we've outlined everywhere that the township should be proactively telling its story. And then likewise, we've started to outline who should be authorized to talk about what as part of all this. This is a level of detail that typically communities don't think about. The only time I guarantee you when you think about this is when something bad happens and somebody says, oh, by the way, the TV crews are here. Who should I have them talk to? And by having a proactive plan in place, you can use this to address things, but you can also use it as, all right, who's going to do this? Because everything we talked about is a lot of work. But it's got to be done if you want to proactively tell your story. I wanted to share this with you because one of the things I asked for was, I asked for these zip codes and property types of where the tax bills go. I didn't get addresses, I just got zip codes. And this is everywhere that a tax bill goes for property in Oscoda Township. And some of them I've numbered, some of them got a few more. Florida, 143. One that's not on here, you guys actually sent 2 tax bills to Hawaii. You send 1 tax bill to Japan. There's it's a military zip code. It doesn't show up, if you were to look at it normally, it doesn't show up like it says Japan. It's a military base in Japan. But you've got a ton of people. And again, this is not a 10,000, there's like 10,000 properties or something like that within the township. But you got 143 of these folks who are in Florida, 44 in Texas, 53 in California, 65 in Ohio. And what this represents are people who are tied to your community in some way. Quite literally, they are paying you money. But what I mean by this is that these are folks, and if you look at down here, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, those are typically, who do you think those folks are? Snowbirds, right? So those are the folks that we know are probably going to be here during the summer months. Then you have Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. These are folks who are more likely weekenders. Now, the reason I point these out as different potential markets is as we look to communicate what's going on, we have their addresses. We don't have them. You guys have their addresses of where you could directly be marketing to. If you're a potential snowbird, when you start looking at folks here in California, in Washington State, in Idaho, in Nevada, in Utah, and Colorado, those aren't weekenders. Those probably aren't snowbirds. Those are probably legacy folks. They used to own, they own the property and they're not here anymore, or their parents own the property and now they do because they inherited it. But these are different audiences we could be talking to. So the snowbirds, we're going to want to make sure we're emphasizing what's going to go on during the summer months, make sure that they know about that. The weekenders, we have the opportunity to bring them up farther into the fall, right? Have you tried Christmas on Oscoda? You come up here all summer, have you tried to come up here for Christmas? We can use these as potential targets. In the state, where most of the tax bills go outside of the IOSCO general vicinity of the 989 area code, huge amount, obviously, in Metro Detroit, Flint area, Lansing area, Kalamazoo has a surprising number, in my opinion, as well. You have a lot of folks who are also weekenders in that case. You also have a fair number of folks who are right about there. And that's a little bit different area that I would consider than necessarily weekenders. These people, oops, wrong one. These people are potential residents. They're living in Midland. They're living in Saginaw and Hemlock. There's a couple of them in Hemlock. Potential to be able to bring them just a little bit farther north to make them full-time residents. Because that's an easier sell. It's a little bit, maybe a little bit longer of a commute, or just not that big of a transition. So all of these, I just want to share this as a source of information as you look to market. These are all folks that you have direct access to that no one else has because you're the taxing jurisdiction. You can FOIA, I'm sure. But my point is, as a unit of government, you have this information and can use it to help market. And you don't even have to use it with extra postage. You can just use it as part of your property tax bills. You can do all these different things that you're already doing, but you have these markets, and we never think of them as markets. We think of them as taxpayers. And it's important that we understand that this is an avenue that we can use to help market the community. Let's talk a little bit about messaging. It's important when we talk about community marketing, and Ben will talk about this a little bit more later. It's okay, typically when we think about community marketing, people think we have to have one thing for everything. It's okay to have different messages. You should have different messages to the different audiences. So there are a couple different avenues. Obviously, we know the folks that are coming to CLEDA are potentials. When a community markets itself, they're marketing themselves against thousands of other communities around the country. Every year, we have kids who graduate from our high schools, and they go off to college, and then they start their lives somewhere else. We have the ability to reach them through social media now because they follow things like #Oscoda, or we can even target them through Facebook. But this opportunity to tell them, to keep in touch with them about what's going on in their hometown, because we'd like them back, wouldn't we, at some point? We're not going to get everybody back, but it's the opportunity to tell that story. The number one reason why kids, millennials, and Gen Zs don't move home after graduation is the perception that there aren't jobs available. So part of that will be, you should be sharing what types of jobs are available. They know that they can make a difference in their community. Sometimes people want to leave because they just want to be anywhere else but where they grew up. I grew up in a town like that too. But there comes a time when, as kids get older and they get married and they have kids, they want to be closer to family. So using that opportunity to market to them to bring them home is part of it. Same with potential residents. You want to make sure that you're marketing not only to your existing residents, telling folks, reminding folks why it's a good place, but again, to those prospective residents as well. The potential residents, again, everything that you guys do for tourism easily applies to potential residents. All the same reasons people would want to move, would want to come here to vacation, is the reason why they want to move here. Does anybody not enjoy the lakefront? Oh, you guys don't live here, that's why. There's a lot of other people who like lakefront, and you guys are way more affordable too than the west side. So using those types of things are as important as you market your community. On business, one of the things I always tell communities, never use the phrase live, work, and play. But this is an opportunity to really live. As we're seeing more and more people, I saw a study a while back that said in the next 2025, 50% of the workforce is going to be contract workforce. So it's going to be people who have the ability to be somewhere else and be able to telecommute and do other options in addition to just showing up physically. So they're going to choose where they want to live and then go from there. So again, you have that opportunity with these potential businesses as well to tell this is the place that you want to be. Tourists, I put these last for a reason, because I think you guys are pretty good at tourists, right, during the high season. But again, working on those shoulder seasons, all the same reasons you want to live here is the same reason why you want to vacation here, so it works both ways. This is my favorite part.
Okay, everybody exhale.
We are doing a lot of angry, right? I realize I speak fast, so I apologize. But
It's okay, I'm Southern, so I speak slow. And I'm pleased to announce that all the boring stuff is over. So, obviously, you see there's a lot of thought, a lot of understanding that's going into the community. I want to talk a little bit, we talked about storytelling, but how do we tell a consistent story? And I always like to start by looking at what the community has. As you can see, there's a lot of similarity in these components. I want to give the community tremendous props. It is very, very rare that you come into a community that has a well thought out wayfinding system like this community does. I love the signs. There's one right out, front of this building. Even more credit when you have two different entities, two partnering townships that work together to adopt a uniform wayfinding system. That is a remarkable accomplishment. So I think one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did as we went through the process was realize there was a tremendous effort and a tremendous resource there, but we want to also have a consistent message as we talk about the township, as we talk about this destination. And there are a couple different components that we always like to play off of there. We like to start with colors. We like to select a color palette that becomes the colors that we use for continuity. There's this interesting mindset in communities that we are forced to use our high school color. Believe it or not, you don't have to do that all the time. You do have to be mindful of what your rival's color is and not use that. And I mean, I went to high school. I still hate blue and yellow because our rivals were blue and yellow. And I live just outside of Philadelphia now, and our rivals were the Eagles, and they used the Philadelphia Eagles mascot. So it pains me to see. That's why I'm a Lions fan. But, going through, starting out, what I like to do is I like to take a series of photos from the community, and then I actually have a program that allows me to load the photos up, and it analyzes the colors in the photos, and it shows me what colors appear most often. And then that's where I kind of derive my colors from, because I want the colors to be represented by the place. So you can't really tell them here, but pretty typical as you would imagine. We did a nice dark blue, light blue, a rich green, kind of a golden color, and then we had two different gradients that we used for accent that were tied into some of the things that we saw. Tying in, obviously, to being this kind of East Coast and this sunrise side, we wanted to be able to play that into it. From there, we always like to look at the typeface. And again, here's another misnomer that happens. Just because your community is beautiful doesn't mean you have to use a script typeface. It's like we want to make sure that we select something that's legible, something that's expandable, something that we can use to connect the dots. I selected a very bold sans serif typeface. A lot of times you look at these and you might think, oh, well, that kind of looks sterile. It doesn't really look warm like I feel like my community is. But the interesting thing about typefaces like this is they're actually designed to be content neutral. They're designed to be the perfect receptacle for your brand equity and the story and the personality that you have. So this, you can start to kind of see, this is what your name looks like in this typeface. And what we actually did was we customized the way that all the letters fit together. We even went in and kind of custom cut the C so it nested in real nice. The fact is, because of your name, because you start with an O, you have another O in there, nobody's ever let me change their name, so we have to be mindful of the letters we're dealing with. But then what you start to see is this starts to set a visual standard for how we create that consistency. And then kind of tying into those wayfinding signs that I just mentioned, you can go through and you can see simply by incorporating the same colors and that same graphic with the paddle, you now have an automatic tie-in to a pre-existing investment. But we want to take it and kind of go from there. One of the big things that we always do, where we've got color, we've got typeface, we've got this approach to graphics, but then we also have to be really mindful of our message. And with that message, I always like to draft what I call a brand statement. And if you would allow me, I want to read that for you now. Are you ready? Okay. Just up Michigan's Sunrise Coast, past the speeding interstate, is a community where vacations begin and never end. A place where the sun is served fresh daily. A place people came because of the land and stayed because of the water. A place that defended our country and protected the globe. A place where the legend of a lumberjack was born. A place where life on these sandy beaches thrives through all four seasons. We are Oscoda, and we are proud of this place we call home. This place where opportunity truly exists. We invite you to spread your wings Joe got one clap when he came up.
That's right.
I come up and I get a clap. So, you know, what this gives us is it still gives us that graphic standard to tie into everything that we saw with the wayfinding. Gives us this opportunity to kind of have this stylized O that represents our monogram. It gives us that place where the land meets the water. It gives us that place where the sun rises on Michigan. It gives us that kind of stylistic look. Is it a plane? Is it a bird? Is it that energy of moving forward? All those things can exist to each of you, and it becomes a very simple icon that allows you to tell a multitude of different stories. And what's nice about this system is as you start to go through it, it expands, it simplifies down very well. You can create horizontal versions, so you've got that ability to really incorporate it in and have the right thing for the right time. But it also, because of those branding elements, it gives you the opportunity to change your look, kind of like you're changing your outfit. So if you want to talk about Paul Bunyan, you can talk about Paul Bunyan, but you don't want to be all Paul Bunyan all the time, right? Like, I mean, the Blue Ox is cool and all, but when you're sitting down across the table with a multi-million-dollar development project, you need to make sure you have the right outfit on. Showing how it can tie into CDB efforts and kind of maintaining some of the standard that has already been set with them. Organizations like the chamber can go through and with slight adaptations of the identities that they already have, they can start to adopt components of this system. It can make its way into the events that go on. This great Rock Fest event that went on, it was the first time last year, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Fantastic event. So being able to kind of tie that in and show the fun-loving expandability of that simple icon. It can make its way into your public schools with your school district logos. You can even adopt some of those components in the athletic area if you want to. You can take it and expand it from the different messaging standpoints, this idea of welcoming people home, that snowbird conversion, that renter to full-time single-family conversion, taking those components and making them work for the elements like Old Orchard Park, bringing people into the community, this fantastic airport authority we're right across from. So again, you start to see this expandability. You see it's make its way into merchandise so people can take the community away with them. Always like to show branded things. I think a lot of times when we go through and we want to create merchandise, the first thing we do is try to find, let's say we're going to design a shirt. We'll go find the cheapest shirt you can find. Feels like sandpaper, but it's going to have our logo on it. Well, nobody wants that. So I use this to illustrate an idea of what we call brand co-opting. Take brands that already have certain values and qualities and then put your identity right alongside it. So as you continue to walk down that road of that trail town designation, obviously you want to use outdoor recreation as a growth catalyst. So take other brands that achieve well in the outdoor recreation realm and put your brand right alongside their brand and kind of siphon some of that value over. Making sure that people have, you can't really see, that's actually a water bottle, hats, just giving the brand resources to the business community so that they can profit from it. We villainize profit for some reason. It's like, oh, don't we deserve something? No, you don't deserve something back. This is like the community and the visitors deserve to show their connection with your community. And this is simply empowering that connection to happen and empowering the business community to be able to make revenue from it.
Plus it's representing your brand outside the community.
Exactly. And then we even went through and we created kind of an advertising template so that you have this base structure of communication that allows you to go through and interchange, and literally all the photos I'm getting ready to show you, Joe and I took in 2 days while we were here on visit. So we've got these interchangeable taglines, taking the color, take flight, taking a show. I mean, you've got first run movies for $5. It's crazy. Take a break, take flight, take a stroll, take a walk on water, take a coffee break. So you can see, it lays the foundation to easily connect the dots and gives the tools to folks to go and tell a story. And with that, we're almost at an hour. We're in our last section, downtown development plan.
That's awesome. Man, you got applause twice. Damn it.
Got a lot of kids.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm getting heckled now. Damn. All right. So we talk about the downtown. Downtown is what we would generally consider being evergreen down to Division, and then pretty much Pearl Street to the waterfront, by and large, based on that. I want to talk about a few things. One is parking. One of the things that we heard as we've done a lot of these conversations is that there isn't enough parking. I would argue that you have probably more parking than you possibly could ever use. Mainly because when you take a look at all these different areas, these are all different either infill opportunities or parking lots. And when you start looking at the amount of square footage that's tied up in parking lots, that's about 40% of your square footage of that downtown is tied up in either public or private parking. So I think parking is not necessarily the issue, especially when you factor in from about here all the way up to here, and each of these cross streets all allow on-street parking as well. You're talking about quite a bit of inventory in terms of the amount of parking. But when I talk a little bit more about kind of the things that we want to talk about is density, and I alluded to this earlier about taking some of the less productive spaces. Now, one of the things that you guys have in your downtown that most communities don't have is there aren't a lot of historic structures in your downtown. And that's kind of a benefit because as you have the opportunity to replace some of these structures, that you can be looking at doing things like this. When we talk about the upper floor housing, it doesn't have to just be, a strip mall, because that's typically what's happened over the last 30 years in particular, is when a building comes down, it gets replaced by a strip mall. Instead, we could be doing things like this, which actually help create more density, help create these housing units, help create retail in the first floor, helps improve the overall image of the community. I'm not saying you need to build this design in your downtown, but I wanted to give that example. It doesn't have to be 5-story buildings or 6-story buildings. You can do 2- and 3-story buildings and add density. A couple other things that we've talked about, doing a vacant building registry. This is an opportunity, it's an incentive and disincentive for property owners who hold on to properties and then don't market them. One of the biggest challenges you guys have is the number of vacant properties downtown. Some of them are being marketed, others are not. And what the vacant building registry does is it creates a disincentive to say, all right, if you don't register your building as a vacant building and put it on the market within a year, then there becomes a fine system. And then the other side is the carrot. So what you don't want to do is you just want to come in with a stick and start hitting people. You want to give people the opportunity to remediate the problem. So the building registry, 1, gives people time to do that, and then 2, we're going to talk about some of the other potential grants for that, which are facade improvements. So facade improvement grants, if you've done downtown work, are not new. This is something that's one of the oldest tricks in the book. However, what typically happens when you see facade projects, and the state's facade grant program does this to a negative extent, is you typically see a facade grant be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, and it's part of a bigger project that's $50,000 to $100,000 that goes into a building. Those are really cool projects that almost never happen in communities because they're so big. And a lot of times the reason property owners let buildings fall into disrepair is because they don't have the money. It's not that they necessarily don't care, it's they don't have the money to make it work. So one of the things that we've talked about is kind of switching a facade grant program a little bit to be more component focused. So looking at those individual parts of the buildings that might need work as a district and making improvements. The example I've given in the last 24 hours talking about this has been awnings. If you look at a lot of the awnings that we have in the downtown buildings, they could probably use an update. Now, if you were to offer, a 50% grant on an awning replacement, that all of a sudden goes from a $50,000 ask on behalf of the building owner to maybe a couple of $1,000 ask. And by using a facade grant in that way, you're doing it in a way that more property owners can participate and improve their property, and you're able to do more of them. So instead of doing one shot at one building, you can address a dozen buildings in the same way.
And you're also, I think one of the things that's the coolest about the component grants is you're taking public dollars to leverage private sector investment, but by taking the component approach, you're also clustering together and allowing you to take advantage of economies of scale. You take all of those awnings to a single awning vendor. You allow a bid process to have multiple people trying to do all of them at one time. So there, you're making that money go even farther by realizing the economies of doing multiple things. So you start year one with awnings. Year two, you go to projecting signs. Year three, you go to exterior lighting. And you've got all these different components by components, and the question for the business or property owner becomes simple. Do I need a new sign? And for the people that have bad taste, you tactfully say, I think that maybe you need a new sign. And then, it works very well, and you start to go through those components. And after a series of years, you start to really see the district as a whole has maintained individuality. It's not forcing everything to feel like a strip center, but it's putting everything on a similar kind of time frame in terms of making sure that those fault lines are good and that kind of thing. Right, and then from there, like once you get to a certain point, we see communities get extremely creative with the components. We saw cats out that offered rear buildings facades with certain downtowns where they had parking behind the buildings and they wanted to hang back of the buildings. We saw some about the micro hotels. We saw some communities that started parking behind so the brand was rear to their building. How many create the delineation between what's outside and what's outside. So it all fits into it.
And the other piece Ben mentioned, on your signs next year. We also do things like paint, things like cafe tables, so all those types of things are all relatively small metal, but if you're moving them on a district-wide scale, you're creating quite a bit of impact every single year you're doing. A couple other things, this is what obviously I'm talking about that development plan, traffic, everyone there was working on the tree, I'm not working on it. We've been working on traffic planning along US 23 on a longer term basis, because we understand that's going to take a while to get there. But this idea of increasing the walkability of the community, even under the streets that you guys have control over in the downtown, part of this also includes creating gateway parks. One of the things that we realize is that even though the beach is really close to US 23, it's something you can't always see when you're downtown. So the creation of a visual connection, which is like just archway, that helps connect the district to the beach. It also happens to mimic the design cue of the band shell. That helps kind of bring the attention down to those side streets to be able to help connect to the beach. Public art murals. You guys actually already have a number of murals in your community. You've got great public art. You guys saw the ad that Ben mocked up with the statue in the Rotary Park. But again, creating more of those and maintaining the ones that you have. I think the one issue I would look at in terms of your existing murals is that they could probably use some maintenance and some upkeep. But continuing that focus on public art. There are tourists and there are people, travelers and visitors who will come to a community just because of the public art, and they'll stick around and go to lunch and do some shopping. Public art is one of those things when you see vibrant colors and activity in a spot, there's the two things that attract people more than anything else. Water attracts people and people attract people. And so if you've got art, that draws people, that color, that all that type of thing helps bring people in. And I think it's one of those things that's relatively low cost, but a high return in terms of helping make a downtown vibrant.
And go back for just a second. This is a big trend that we're seeing a lot of communities do. They call them horizontal murals. Literally all you're doing is you're making a single stencil. They turn into a paint by number project, so you can have youth in the community participate in them. But what they start to do is they start to change the interaction with the art, and they start to create a visual ribbon using the walking surface as connection. So, as you want to enhance the connection between the highway and the beach, you could go and you could do brick paving streetscaping at tens of thousands of dollars per block. Or you could explore using a horizontal mural to create a visual connection at a much, much lower cost. So just wanted to throw those ideas out and just keep you thinking creatively.
And I would include this, we talked about increasing the walkability and improving the crosswalks on the non-US 23 frontage. But to be able to do, instead, we say decorative crossings, and if you deal with the municipal governments, people have a tendency to think about the brick, kind of the expensive stuff that people will do in crosswalks. You can do stenciling as part of that as well. So it doesn't have to be just strictly, that high dollar, streetscape stuff. You can do art as part of those crosswalks. Yes, sir.
Would that have to be agreed upon, everybody along that strip, or is that something that could just be determined
Typically, on a public route, they'll do some sort of public hearing about what we're gonna do as part of an art, and people voice it at that point. But
The nice thing is, I'm never one to restrict the artistic expression that comes out through public art, but different kinds of public art perform different functions. Part of the reason I suggest the paint by number stencil approach to this, it typically is going to refrain and restrict anything that anybody might see as offensive. You know what I mean? It's like, the moment you start talking about sculptures, everybody has an opinion. When you start talking about reoccurring patterns, you don't find as many. But yeah, being able to engage the folks, and many times what you end up finding is people like the idea. I had one community where the businesses actually did an after hours promotion where they were offering sales at the same time that they were painting in front of the stores. So there's some cool ways that you can kind of dig into that.
And Ben mentioned, engaging the youth in projects like this. I think that's really important, especially if you can do paint by number types of activities. If anybody's been to the art alley in Clare, they've done a number of projects down in the back alley there in Clare. That's a good example nearby. But this idea, when you engage youth in the process, it's less likely to become defaced because they help do it. So it's also, plus it's creating an ownership of the community. Because I think part of the issue here is that we're not retaining our youth. So again, having them involved in the process is really important.
And we're seeing artistic crosswalks a lot. I am not suggesting this to you all on the state highway. Because MDOT might not like it. But when we were in Vermont, we had a similar situation where a community had a desperate need for a crosswalk on a state highway. And it was a weird meeting because, everybody in the community actually all agreed. Yes, we all need a crosswalk and it needs to be there. And we came out the next night and strangely enough, someone had painted one there. And what made it really funny was we knew exactly who it was, and it just so happened to be an alderman. But several weeks later, he sent us a photo. VDOT had been traveling the road, seeing this crosswalk in horrible need of repainting, and repainted his gorilla crosswalk and made it official because apparently that hand wasn't talking to this hand. So it is funny. I do think that one of the things that we do know is pedestrian connectivity on the east and west side of the highway is a significant issue for your downtown. Obviously, with it being a state highway, you're going to have to deal with those restrictions. But we are seeing communities start to use art making its way into those crosswalks. And a lot of times people really like it because what it does is the presence of the color and vibrancy in the roadway actually has a traffic calming effect anyway. So there are always things to explore as it comes to that.
As we were exploring some of the stuff too, kind of if you've ever looked at Department of Transportation regulations, one of the really fascinating things, and by fascinating I mean stupid, things that they require is that you have to prove the number of people who are already crossing a place before they'll put a crosswalk. Yeah, I'll repeat that. You have to prove how many people are already using it as a cross area in order for them to approve it as a cross area. So I completely agree with Ben not to go out and do this yourself, but this idea of going out and doing these types of activities to increase that walkability.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
You referred to that as a state highway, it's a federal highway.
USDOT, correct.
23.
Exactly, but except MDOT has responsibility as a jurisdiction at that spot. So yeah, state highway, you're right. There is a different designation between US 23 and the M's, but it's all through MDOT is who does all.
Yeah, I should admit I meant state maintained. So sorry.
So downtown actions. Ben talked about that micro retail. So as part of that, we talked about the vibrancy grants of those demising walls, but really encouraging that. There's a number of makers who are in every community, folks who are selling stuff on Etsy, people who have ideas. So giving them an opportunity, either from a micro retail, which is more permanent in nature, although smaller, but the other opportunity is pop-up shops. And folks, I think, are fairly familiar with pop-up shops. This idea that people can come in and then essentially rent a spot for about 3 months, anywhere from 1 to 3 months, to be able to set up shop. Typically, this happens in a lot of communities around Christmas time. Here, and especially other resort communities, you can see where it's summertime, but allowing folks to come in just for that short area if it's not getting leased any other way. So it allows those property owners to at least get some cash out of that process and be able to help create some of that vibrancy. So implementation, where do we go from here? Each of the recommendations that we've talked about are included in the documentation that we're giving to the township. We're in the process of finalizing these actual documents because they need to receive approval from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. But these documents will look like this. This is the Economic Development Community Marketing Strategy and Downtown Plan, the Strategic Communications Plan, and then the place branding as well. And we met, for 2.5 hours yesterday with Dave and Todd, and a lot of this stuff is going to be on their plate. But we've outlined the potential projects, the key responsible parties. We've outlined the timelines in which the expectations are, the potential budget, and then potential sources for some of that funding. There's a lot of what we talked about today that doesn't require a lot of money. And we want to emphasize those things, especially in the short term, to be able to show you can actually do a lot of things that we're talking about without spending a ton of money. Now, traffic calming, we've talked about with MDOT, that's going to take years to work on, that's going to be expensive when it happens. But there's a lot of other stuff that we can do when we talk about the public art and vibrancy grants. Things that you can do for under $50,000 in a municipal setting, that's not very much money. But to be able to do it with between $10,000 and $50,000 and be able to make quite a bit of impact.
And then a couple of things that we're including as well is a comprehensive brand rollout strategy that is phased based off of what makes the most sense for typical township budgets. This is a good checklist for them to work from. It's not one of those things where you have to do it in any perfect order, but it's really, really nice to be able to kind of know all the tasks up front. Then from there, we're also going to be sharing a what's called How to Be a Brand Partner. This is literally a brainstorming worksheet for community organizers, for event organizers, for businesses in the community, all different ways that they might participate and use the brand components. And then the final thing that we'll give is a score sheet that we've developed for the township for them to be able to self-score their own implementation and help keep on track for identifying the low-hanging fruit and the things that make the most sense. And one of the things that we specifically did with this is it's on a 100-point scale, and we applied the points based off of the impact and the cost. And believe it or not, you might have one thing that's worth 3 points but costs $50,000, and you might have something that costs nothing but is worth 5 points. Well, that's because to us, we think the stuff that's free probably ought to do before the $50,000 stuff. Communities typically like to look at a plan like this, hone in on what seems like it's going to be the hardest and most expensive, and decide that's going to be where they start. And then get frustrated when nothing happens. So we've tried to create all these resources and tools to really help ease into it, earn some quick wins, tie the visual implementation and the rollout of the brand with Todd and his rollout here as the the economic improvement director, and really starting to see the implementation of this set of plans. So we're really excited. Hopefully you can tell based off the nature of the presentation that Joe and I definitely have fallen in love with the place that you call home. We're excited and optimistic about your future. We're excited about the people that we've met and the opportunities that you have. So we just really appreciate your time and attention. We've talked for an hour and 15 minutes. We know that we're getting ready to move directly into another presentation at 1:30 with John. So we want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to take a quick break and regather themselves. But thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.